All right, my friends, welcome back to Anti-War Radio on Chaos Radio 95.9 in Austin, Texas. I'm your host, Scott Horton, and my guest today is my friend, Nelson Linder. He's the director of the local Austin, Texas office of the NAACP. Welcome to the show, Nelson.
Hey, Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, sir?
Hey, man, I'm doing great, and it's fantastic to be here and be on your show.
I know. I've been looking forward to interviewing you for so long, and unfortunately, I'm stuck covering foreign policy pretty much all day, every day on this show. But, I'm also getting sick and tired. Well, I have been for a long, long time, sick and tired of seeing the Austin Police Department murder unarmed men, almost in every case, I think, unarmed black men in this town. And something's got to be done about it, if only publicly shaming them. If that's all I can do, then we'll do that. You know what? If it's okay with you, I'd like to go ahead and just real quick, just for a minute or two, if we can just get this out of the way, if I can get a quote of you on tape, I already know what you're going to say, about Ron Paul. Here's a man who they have nothing on him. His middle name is Ernest. He's been married to his wife for 50 years, was a milk boy when he was a little kid, track star, and they just got nothing on him. They got nothing. Except in the 1980s, some papers were written by a ghost writer, I know that you know, that said some pretty disparaging things about black folks, and it is still going around on the blogosphere. People will not just use their Google and do their research. They just take the first link they find, and these rumors are still going around that Dr. Ron Paul is some kind of racist. And I know that you know Dr. Paul, so I was just wondering if I could give you a chance to describe what you believe his character is.
Well, sure. I met Ron Paul about 20 years ago on another station, and he was doing a presentation, and I called in and talked to him. I've also read his work. Let's face it, Ron Paul is a thinker. He's also a constitutionalist. He believes in the Constitution. And in America in 2007, where that document has been tossed around like a piece of paper, he's a very, very dangerous man. He's talking about real issues. He's very intelligent. He's very informed. And he's a free thinker. So that's going to invite attacks on him. As far as a comment, there are a lot of folks who don't quite understand the libertarian philosophy. I mean, we appreciate the fact that you watch the Constitution, but in reality, as black people sometimes, we don't feel social policy. And sometimes people can say things in a context where it can be distorted and have a much greater impact. So I think in his case, he was basically taken out of context. I've watched his work. I admire what he does on foreign policy. He has a lot of potential. I just think that in the future, we want to talk more about social issues because in reality, if you're talking about trying to have a meaningful impact on the American political system, you've got to understand that as African Americans, we do have to deal with social issues because of our history. And I think if they would do that as well as talk about the fact that the Constitution is very, very important, I think a lot of folks would be a lot more comfortable not only joining the dialogue, but perhaps being a part of the party. So I like Ron Paul personally. I like what he's saying. I think he's sincere. I think he's correct in what he's saying. And I hope that more folks in the other parties develop the courage to join him and address the issues that I think will decide the fate of this country in the near future.
Mm-hmm. That's a very important point, and I think it's a fair criticism of Dr. Paul that he perhaps does not spend enough time explaining carefully to some of the weakest among us and the poorest among us who look to the government to be their safety net and so forth. He's got to really address them particularly and explain why it is that the absolute liberty or close to absolute liberty he endorses is really the way that they ought to go, the policy they ought to support.
Exactly.
And I think that's a fair criticism that he could do better about that, and I'll do my best through a couple of degrees of separation. Hopefully I can pass on that message to him from you. I take that very seriously. But and you've met him, right? You've sat down and had dinner with Ron and stuff. Yeah. So, but you never thought that he was thinking, oh, a black guy, while your back was turned or anything?
No. I met him. We had a very, very direct handshake. We looked eye to eye. He's a very informed man. No, not at all. That was not my impression at all. He was very, very careful about what he said. He was not disrespectful. I don't get that from Ron Paul. I think he's a very serious person. I just think he was taken out of context based on that conversation. I never got that impression from him at all.
Yeah. Well, and I totally agree with that. And like you said, the man's a libertarian, and the libertarian philosophy is, of course, everyone is an individual to be judged by the content of their character, period. So how could he possibly be a racist if he's an individualist?
Right. And I think, too, Scott, if we look at the big picture here, we're talking about the Constitution. I mean, my God, you can't have a more important topic than that particular document in 2007, because if we understood it, we wouldn't allow what's happening in this country currently today to go on. So I think he's got the right topic, obviously. We need to figure out some way to involve the American public in general and show them that even in 2007, if you understand that document, you can use it to change things. But unfortunately, let's face it, it requires discipline, it requires a certain kind of courage and a certain kind of scrutiny, and nobody wants to be attacked for having a different point of view. So I think that's a challenge he faces in this time when we're looking at almost a certain kind of fascism in this country.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. And you know, I went to his barbecue birthday party in Houston over the weekend, and part of his speech, he talked about how people sometimes criticize him for wanting to be a weak president. He wants to basically give up all the unconstitutional powers that the presidency has usurped from the people, the states, and the Congress,
right,
and return it where it belongs under the real separation of powers and so forth. And people criticize him for that. And he pointed out, and I absolutely agree, that it takes strength. It takes incredible moral strength to resist the temptation of power. And Ron Paul is that perfect balance where he's just barely willing to run when people beg him to. But then he only wants the power so he can give it up. And that takes an incredible amount of strength to resist the ability to use the power of the state against whoever you might want for whatever your whim. That's the way basically all the rest of them act. And so, you know, I believe that he's really the strongest-willed of them all, and it's because of his moral center.
Well, I think another thing, too, is that if we look at America today, Scott, 77% of the American population can name the Three Stooges. Less than 30% can tell you about the separation of powers, about executive power,
right,
about legislative power, judicial power. So we have a problem. Until we educate the population about what the Constitution really is and about the importance of checks and balances, he won't be fully appreciated. And that's my challenge as well. How do we get folks to think about things that are important in this country, like the Constitution, like separation of power? And I think that's our challenge. More work, more information. We have to also engage people in different places. We can't have these conversations on the fringes. We've got to go to town hall meetings. We got to go to where these other folks are. We got to encourage folks to look at these different parties. The two-party system has failed America. I have no doubt about that. It has failed America. We're an evolving country now. We're growing with all kinds of diversity. Let's look at options and different ideas. If we don't do that, we're going to basically do a tremendous disservice to ourselves. So I think the idea of an independent thinker, a new party that's based on the Constitution, really couldn't come at a better time. We need that challenge, and I hope folks will have enough courage to research the party and look at what they're really trying to do, I think, from a total standpoint, especially in foreign policy, because let's face it, when you're invading foreign countries and killing hundreds of thousands of people, I mean, how immoral can you get? It doesn't get any dirtier than that.
No, it doesn't. It is the worst possible situation. And even just this week, what the situation on the ground in Iraq is just incredible. It's unbelievable.
And these are young folks, Scott, like you and I, who have been sacrificed for absolutely nothing, for money and power. I mean, that in itself is enough reason to look at Ron Paul seriously, but also to look at the whole party and try to find ways, once again, to make it more, I think, relevant to everybody, make it more relevant socially, and try to educate folks about what you're really trying to accomplish. And I'm definitely committed to that, because we need change in this country. And until we invite change, these other parties are not going to really address us at all. And right. I'm very serious about that.
Yeah, you are. And your history here in Austin, Texas is going an extra 10 miles on every case requiring it, which is an endless list, to just simply try to hold the government to their own laws. I mean, I can't think of a single radio interview or TV interview or anything I've ever seen of you where what you're saying is, you know, we need some kind of massive this or that. All you're saying is, listen, it's not okay for you guys to go around killing unarmed black guys and the law not applying to you the same way it applies to us. I mean, think of the double standard.